This increase to 6,000 CFS will occur gradually as the water levels in Buffalo Bayou eventually move, and as the water levels in Galveston Bay begin to recede as well. So the dams will be able to more fully reach their discharge potential. And the importance there is that, recognizing we still are in tropical storm season, it's imperative to get as much water out of these dams as we can to ensure that we can hold water in the future in future rain events, whether it's next week, 3 weeks from now, or in the future beyond that, so that we can ensure the dams operate as intended. With rainfall still occurring in downstream reaches of Buffalo Bayou and tributaries, as well as with the discharge of water from Addicks and Barker, the elevation of the bayou is holding fairly steady at this time and may take several days to recede. But again, we'll have to monitor those conditions and provide updated reports. We're working on producing maps that generally estimate the potential extent of flooding below and above Addicks and Barker beyond the extreme rain event flooding that has already occurred, to include the operations of the outlet structures and auxiliary spillways of Addicks and Barker. These maps will be posted online when ready. The uncontrolled auxiliary spillway flow at the north end of Addicks is starting today until the pool rises above an approximate elevation of 109.6 feet. The flow around the end of the dam will be fairly small, on the order of less than 100 CFS. The peak flow is expected to occur on the 31st of August at a flow rate of approximately 4,500 CFS at a peak elevation of 110.4 feet. When the pool elevation rises above 109.6 feet, the auxiliary spillway, which is armored, goes into operation. These higher flows will continue until the pool elevation drops back down below this elevation, which is expected around September 2nd. Much lower flows, less than approximately 100 CFS, are expected around the end of the dam until the pool elevation drops below 108 feet, which is expected to occur around the 7th of September. These flows could increase flooding potential downstream. The Addicks spillway overflows will migrate toward Buffalo Bayou through the Addicks flood control ditch and along the Beltway 8 corridor crossing the I-10. The effect of the spread of water is a mitigating consideration, however, as it enters streets, drainage networks, and with some flow potentially diverting into White Oak Bayou. Indications are the flow depths of the migrating overflows will range between approximately a half a foot to 2 feet, with the arrival of flows in 1 to 2 days into Buffalo Bayou, predominantly via Rummel Creek. Modeling continues to better understand the effect of these inflows on the impact to water levels in Buffalo Bayou. For Barker, uncontrolled spillway overflows are expected to occur starting on about September 2nd of approximately 100 CFS at the South Auxiliary Spillway and 200 CFS at the North Auxiliary Spillway at an elevation of 104.4 feet. These flows will migrate off of government-owned reservoir land through properties in the vicinity of the spillways and then enter the Barker and Claudine ditches, which lead back into Buffalo Bayou. The spillways for both dams are armored and are intended to handle designed overflows while maintaining structural integrity. Properties upstream of Addicks and Barker are experiencing and expected to experience flooding starting yesterday. A listing of neighborhoods located near the dams that have potential to flood, given the understanding of current and future potential rainfall amounts, is listed at the website readyharris.org, readyharris.org. Throughout this storm event, the Corps of Engineers has had dam safety engineers monitoring the integrity of the Addicks and Barker dam structures continuously. We have found no problems, but if we did, we have had a construction contractor with materials on standby throughout the entire event to perform any required repairs that would be needed to maintain structure integrity. Public safety is our number one concern as we work closely with our partners, the City of Houston, Fort Bend County, Harris County, and the Texas Department of Public Safety as we monitor the dams and reservoirs. Residents adjacent to the reservoirs, both upstream of Addicks and Barker and downstream along Buffalo Bayou, are asked to be vigilant because the water in the reservoirs continues to rise and has significant potential to cause additional flooding impacts. We continue our monitoring and modeling as new information becomes available, and will continue to report on the status of current conditions and expected conditions. And that concludes our report if there are any questions.
Yeah, so this morning you said that the overflows at Addicks would stop on September 20th. Now it sounds like you're saying they're going to stop by the 7th.
Yes, we've gotten refined information, and we're able to bracket the uncertainty a little bit better, and this is the most revised estimates.
All right, and with the second dam, the overflows were initially supposed to start on Thursday, and now you're saying they're going to start September the 2nd, which I think would be next week.
Yes,
Okay.
that's what we believe.
And if we go back to the flow data for a second, this morning you said that there were about 4,000 cubic feet of water coming out of both dams combined. And you provided some numbers here where you said that there was 3,800 cubic feet of water coming out of which?
Let me rephrase that for you. This morning we said that the discharge rates at that time were 3,800 cubic feet per second and 3,500 feet per second for Addicks and Barker respectively, for a total of 7,300 cubic feet per second. But our goal
Is 8,000.
is 8,000.
This morning the other number was 4,000.
No, it was 4,000 each. That's correct. Yes.
Do you know what percentage of the county's land mass is actually flooded and drunk?
That's a question that maybe you have to defer to Jeff. I don't know.
What was the question?
How much of the county is flooded? Do you have I realize it's a moving target, but do you have a rough percentage?
No, we'll have something for the evening briefing. Maybe we can work on that, the evening briefing. That's a good question. We'll work on that for the evening briefing.
Those maps that you're talking about, is that strictly for this situation, or is it the whole county?
It is strictly for Addicks and Barker, yes.
Are you able to get up in the air to do aerial surveys of this? Is it another too rough to do that, or
Well, the Flood Control District is currently conducting an aerial assessment of the county with a Harris County Sheriff's Office helicopter. We have been in the air since about 8:30 this morning, and we continue to be in the air. We're getting some images that are being sent to us from the helicopter, and it's bad. It's very bad from the air.
How long would it take to survey the whole county? Is that a matter of weeks, or can you do that?
From the air, we are going to survey as much as we can today. We're focusing on the east, the northeast side, the north side, and of course the western part of the county and Buffalo Bayou. For the other channels, Braze Bayou, and the areas that flooded so badly on Saturday and Sunday in the southeast part of the county, most of that water has already gone down, and so there's not a whole lot to see from the air in those areas. So we're focusing on where the water remains at this time. I have a few points to add on the Addicks-Barker situation. At this time, we had mentioned this morning that we were going to review the subdivision list that were provided yesterday for the potential for flooding in both Addicks and Barker due to the pools. We have reviewed that list, and at this time, we have no changes to that list. Even though there's been some change in the forecast of the pool elevation, we feel that the list that was provided is comprehensive and continues to indicate the threat for flooding in those areas. I do want to be clear that if you live in those subdivisions and you are not experiencing flooding at this time, That does not mean you will not experience flooding. The pool of the reservoir continues to rise. The water is going to continue to move toward the west at a very slow rate, or uphill on the western side of the reservoir. And so areas that are flooding just to the east will continue to get deeper, and areas to the west will begin to take on water. Essentially what that is we have seen that the streets begin to flood first, and the structures then begin to flood second as the water rises. We've had a flood control district crew at the dam along with a Corps of Engineer crew to examine the overflow section. Like Mr. Russo said, there is a very small amount of water currently passing through the overflow part. The crew also investigated some of the subdivisions immediately adjacent to the reservoir and determined that water was very close to impacting homes in several of those subdivisions. The aerial assessment that is ongoing clearly showed significant house flooding in Addicks and Barker reservoirs. And in the Bear Creek Village area, there was extremely deep house flooding, at least halfway up the homes. The crew also indicated that there is roughly a half a foot of water from the pool at the intersection of Eldridge Road and Tanner, which is just immediately west of where the overflow section is. There was also indications of ponding and flow near Ginger Ponds and Tanner at the entrances to Lake of Eldridge and Lakes of Eldridge North. An update on the number of structures that we are having impacted at this time in the reservoir. At the current elevations for Addicks, we are estimating 2,500 homes are currently flooded, and in Barker, roughly 670 homes. And with that, that concludes my section of this. Any questions?
I'm sorry, you said on for Addicks, 2,500 homes, Barker, 670 homes, that's a result of the discharge?
No, that is not a result of the discharge. That is a result of the pool of the reservoir continuing to rise. So as the pool continues to rise, it is backing up toward the west and flooding the structures along the western portion of the reservoir land. At the releases that are going on right now through the dams, going downstream into Buffalo Bayou, have resulted in no increase in Buffalo Bayou. So Buffalo Bayou has been flooding since Saturday night. It has been at these historic levels since Saturday night, and the current level has not changed very much at all, even when these releases were begun. We've examined some of the data with the Corps this morning and some flood control engineers as to why it appears to be taking Buffalo Bayou so long to recede. And the answer potentially could be in some of the downstream inflows that are resulting further downstream. As a matter of fact, a tide gauge in the Houston Ship Channel at Manchester is currently at almost 12 feet above sea level. So there's a tremendous amount of inflow coming in to Buffalo Bayou and the Houston Ship Channel, and that is slowing the recession of not only Buffalo Bayou, but several of our watersheds. The sheer volume of water that has been dropped has raised the ship channel to levels that we've never seen before.
Can you talk a little bit about what's going on with the San Jacinto River?
Yes. There is disastrous flooding taking place along the West Fork and the East Fork of the San Jacinto River, Loose Bayou and Gum Gully, and also the lower portion, what we call the main stem of the San Jacinto River, and that's the portion from Lake Houston downstream to Galveston Bay. We have exceeded by almost 2 feet the historical record at Humble US 59. We have been in constant coordination with the River Forecast Center to try to understand. They were thinking the river was going to crest. It continues to rise. It appears that the large amount of inflow into Lake Houston is producing significant backwater effects on the West Fork of the San Jacinto River. And what I mean by that is Lake Houston has had such tremendous inflow into it that it's actually backing up the water on the West Fork of the San Jacinto River. And so it continues to rise. The flood wave is currently passing through Lake Houston and going over the spillway at something on the order of 375,000 cubic feet per second. This is a tremendous amount of flow. And this will be pushing down the lower San Jacinto River and into Galveston Bay. So at this time, we are hopeful that we will see a crest on the West Fork sometime later today or tonight. I'm hesitant to get into how much more rise we may see because thus far the forecasting on the West Fork has been a little bit low, and so the river continues to go high. And we must all understand that we are dealing with situations that we've never dealt with before. We are well past some of the curves, if you will, that we use in models to predict flood levels. And because of that, the forecasts in some places are not very good at this point. And that's just a function of the fact that this storm is so large and so big. We've never dealt with anything like this before. Typically in a situation like this, the United States Geological Survey, or USGS, crew can go out and take measurements to help us and the River Forecast Center with the forecasting effort, but they are unable to reach most of these places. The bridges are completely underwater.
Can you talk a little bit about how much of the strain having to deal with the crisis on the San Jacinto at the same time you're having to deal with the crisis on the reservoirs is placing on county resources?
That's a great question.
On just your office, how do you track all of it?
Dealing with one of these events would be a lot, but dealing with the reservoir situation, dealing with the flooding of the creeks and bayous, and then dealing with the potential levee situations we have at Inverness Forest and Northgate Levee, or at Northgate Crossing. We have been working very hard to make sure we get the best possible information to everybody in a timely manner. And I'd like to address both of the levees that we have mandatory evacuations for. The good news is that neither one of the levees have been overtopped, neither one of the levees have been breached. We have not found any structural integrity issues with the levees. At the Spring Creek site, this is at I-45 near north of the Hardy Toll Road. This is the Northgate levee. The water in Spring Creek has crested and it is falling. We would like the mandatory evacuation to continue to be honored at that location, and we feel that we may be able to lift it either later today or tomorrow. The reason why we are keeping that in place at this time in coordination with the subdivision is because there is a lot of water and pressure that continues to be pushed against that levee, and anything can happen sometimes when you put that much water and pressure against the levee. At the Inverness Forest site, the creek has crested, but it has not fallen very much, and so the water remains very near the top of that levee. Obviously, we are going to keep the mandatory evacuation in place at that levee. In the event that there is additional rise on the creek, which at this point we are really not expecting, but it's so close to the top that we don't want to chance allowing people back in and then having the creek rise a little bit and we get overtopping. Also, as with the Northgate system, this is a tremendous amount of water and pressure against that levee. And so, as we mentioned before, things can go wrong when you have that much pressure against the levee. And so it's best for people to remain out of that area. Any other questions?
Can you go back to the subdivisions? You talked about nearly 3,000 homes being affected. How much water are they seeing inside of their homes?
So in the Addicks reservoir, the lowest homes have anywhere from about 3.5 to 5 feet of water, and it gradually gets shallower or less as you move to the west. In the Barker Reservoir, We have about 700 homes, and it's the same situation. The lowest ones have about 3 to 4 feet of water, and there are some that are just now beginning to take on water on the western fringe of that. And I say again that these homes that are taking on water are flooded already. Additional structures will be flooded to the west of the homes that have already taken on water, because the pool of the reservoirs will continue to rise. And so if your street is beginning to flood in these areas, or it is very close to getting into your house, you will be flooding. And at the same time, I also want to mention that there continues to be record flooding along Spring Creek and Cypress Creek. And the water along Cypress Creek has been very slow to come down. We continue also to have record flooding along Cedar Bayou. That's the bayou in the far eastern part of the county between Liberty and Harris. This is impacting greatly the Baytown area. We have had issues with the I-10 bridge, meaning overtopping in some places of the I-10 bridge. Also continue to have flooding on portions of Hunting Bayou. And the fact is that there's just so much water trying to drain from this area. It is going to take at least the next 48 hours to really get the watersheds to begin to fall and water to start coming down.
Can you talk a little more, you spoke about it this morning, comparing the conditions in the San Jacinto River to what happened in 1994 when they had the pipeline breaks and the river catch on fire.
Right. In the San Jacinto River, when it gets to these levels, the San Jacinto River is a very sandy river. It's a very sandy bottom, like beach sand. And as these massive amounts of flow come through, they're going to result in erosion and scour of the river bottom. The lower portion of the San Jacinto River from Lake Houston down to Galveston Bay has several pipeline crossings that come up from the Houston Ship Channel and feed all kinds of oil, natural gas, in some cases chemical agents, to other locations in the nation. And in 1994, the scour was so severe at some of these pipeline locations that the pipelines ruptured and eventually caught on fire. There's also several bridges, several railroad tracks. All of this infrastructure is not meant to be kept underwater and under these amounts of flow conditions for this amounts of time. And the water depths in some of them have greatly exceeded their design capacities. And so we are starting to see some failures of infrastructure. Bridges, roadways. We saw the failure over on the West Boat, or the wall gateway. The longer we keep the water in place, the more likely it becomes that you start to see these types of infrastructure failures, especially when it comes to bridges, pipelines, and railroad tracks, anything that goes across the channel. You can imagine the amount of force that is being placed against these structures and the amount of debris that is coming down some of these watersheds right now that is crashing into these structures. So yes, we are watching that situation very closely on the lower portion of the San Jacinto River.
Judge, just to make sure I have you clearly, you said, okay, so bridges, roadways, other structures, they're starting to fail now because of what's going on in San Jacinto River, right?
We have had reports, not specifically in the San Jacinto River, but in some other locations of roadways that are starting to sink, culverts that have been washed out. There was a report earlier from law enforcement, and we have not confirmed this, that there was damage to a bridge, and I don't know exactly where it was. It was somewhere in the eastern part of Harris County. But none of this is really surprising. When you're dealing with this amount of water for this amount of time, that's a lot for the structures to take. It's also for locations that are being flooded, water is getting into things that water should not be getting into. And that's because the water is so high in locations. Backup generators, electrical grids. That's one reason why we do have some power outages across the area is because some of these substations are being flooded. Obviously, you can't bring this stuff back online when you can't reach it. And then once you do reach it, you have to repair it. It's not like hanging up wires. This is stuff that shouldn't be getting wet.
You talked a little bit about the Lake Houston situation. The West Lake Houston, Summerwood area, are there any concerns over there?
We have heard a lot of information about the water rising in that area. Again, there is a lot going on hydrologically in Lake Houston right now, and the water continues to rise in some of those areas. So yes, there is potential for additional flooding around Lake Houston. Some of the flooding is already extremely deep, but there is some potential for additional flooding, especially since the West Fork has not crested yet.
Can you kind of clarify, because we've had a lot of people asking, I know you have these list of neighborhoods, but a lot of people are still asking if they should be concerned. These are neighborhoods that were only colored on the map, correct? Is that where all of these are? And so if you're like east or south, you shouldn't worry about this.
These particular neighborhoods were in that colored section of the map. So what we have done is we took the color section of those maps that have been produced are the ground elevations. So that's where we have to start. How high is the ground? You compare the ground to what the reservoir level is. So if the ground is 108 feet and the reservoir level is 109 feet, that means you're going to have 1 foot of water over the ground. And so we know the forecast from the Corps is to go to 110.4. So we mapped 110.4, and if that line intersected those subdivisions, they are on the list. That's how we came up with that, and that's why you're on the list.
So anyone who is not under a voluntary or mandatory evacuation, should they be concerned?
At this time, if you are not under the voluntary or mandatory evacuations, for this particular situation in Addicks or at the levees, the answer is no. But I want to be clear that we do not have evacuation orders in place for all of these other locations that are flooding, or we would be evacuating all over the place. We just can't evacuate the whole county for a magnitude of flood that we're dealing with. There's just no way. We would have had to have started immediately when the rain started, and then the question becomes, where do you go? We could have been taking people that were perfectly fine and putting them in an area that's now underwater, because we just don't know where it's going to rain. In this particular case, we all got the rain. The whole county got the rain. And the flooding is obviously devastating for us.
So what do you recommend for the people who live in the Addicks Barker area right now? What is the update now for those people who watch this one?
So for those people that are flooding in the pool sections of the reservoir, that flooding is taking place. This flooding is going to continue for weeks. For those of you that are in those called subdivisions, the water is going to continue to rise. Most of you, or some of you, will continue to get water to build up in your street and possibly get into your homes. For those subdivisions that we listed earlier, in the spillway section of the reservoir, where the water is starting to come out of the reservoir on the north side, and I'll repeat those: Eldridge Park, Lakes on Eldridge, Lakes on Eldridge North, Independent Farms, Tanner Heights, and the Heritage Business Park. Right now, there is a very small amount of flow coming out of Addicks Reservoir that is really only impacting streets. One I forgot to list is Twin Lakes. That is only impacting streets. As the pool continues to rise, more and more water will begin to flow out of Addicks Reservoir through the spillway section. And you will continue to see inundation of that area in and around these subdivisions. Down Tanner Road, possibly as far north as West Little York. We've been looking at how far north this might extend. And we know it's going to go up Eldridge to some degree, possibly to West Little York, pretty much all of Tanner from Eldridge all the way over to Beltway 8. And then it is eventually going to, in some fashion, turn south between the dam and the Beltway and head down to Buffalo Bayou. Now, what that looks like and how that happens, as the Corps was explaining, is still a little bit we don't understand completely how that's going to happen. There's a lot of various ways that this may play out. as water begins to interact with the subdivisions, with the structures. Right now, a lot of the flow that's coming out, which is a very small amount, is actually finding the lowest ground and starting to pool. So if there's a low parking lot over here, it's trickling over here. If there's a detention basin over here, it's trickling over there. And so for most of the day today, we haven't seen a lot of rise. But as the reservoir begins to rise a little bit further, we get more flow coming out, these low spots fill up, then the water is going to start covering the ground, filling up in the streets, and possibly getting into the homes. And that's going to take a little bit of time. And then it'll start moving down towards Buffalo Bayou. And we have been working on timing, how quickly this gets down there, what impacts it's going to have on Buffalo Bayou. And right now, at least for the next 24 hours, we feel comfortable saying that there will be no additional impacts on Buffalo Bayou for the next 24 hours. Because we don't expect enough flow to come out of Addicks Reservoir to actually make it down to Buffalo Bayou. And so we are looking really at what happens at the peak flow in the next couple of days, and how much of that water gets down to the bayou, and what type of impact that will have on the water level of Buffalo Bayou.
You know, David Livingston and Conroe area?
I'm not familiar with what's going on at Livingston. I know at Lake Conroe, we have been in contact with the San Jacinto River Authority. Lake Conroe sits on the west fork of the San Jacinto River, which comes down to Lake Houston. And we have been in contact with them. They have significantly reduced their releases today. Lake Conroe set a new record pool elevation, surpassing the October 1994 flood. And they have stabilized the lake. They have felt like they have a good handle on the pool elevation in the lake. And so they have cut back significantly their releases.
Going back to the dams, there's plans to rehabilitate those dams. If those are completed, would they essentially, or would communities and subdivisions behind those dams see less of an impact?
So I can speak to that. We have a currently ongoing project to reconstruct the outlet structures for both Addicks and Barker. It's part of a planned maintenance and improvement initiative. That work will be completed in the year 2021. We're currently working on that. In fact, the construction contractor that's out there right now is also the contractor for the improvements to the structure. That won't be different than the configuration of the existing outlet structures. However, we are working closely with Harris County Flood Control District as the potential non-federal sponsor for a study that we have budgeted for, and if funded, will review the performance of the current Addicks and Barker to better understand where we may be able to make improvements to the performance of those structures, whether it's increasing the volumetric capacity, whether it's providing for additional discharge routes, improving discharge routes and downstream, or whether it's actually connecting the two dams with underground tunnels to equilibrate the levels. So there may be several strategies that we can look at. That will be done in a study. If the study is approved and funded, we would perform that work. It would take about 3 years and cost about $3 million.
And with revised projections in terms of the timeline for the overflows at Addicks, are you guys still expecting the water volume to still be that, what was it, 4,700?
4,500?
4,500.
Yes, as of right now. So we'll continue to monitor and model, and if we see any changes due to rainfall rate changes or runoff changes, we'll certainly revise our figures.
Any other questions? We will hold another briefing this evening at 7:30, and we are going to transition these briefings into an Addicks Barker Reservoir update, and I want to also offer updates on the rest of the county so we can at one time have a clear situational awareness briefing of everything that is going on, because things are changing in other areas of the county and city also, just not at Addicks and Barker, pretty much like we did today.